name is Michelle Kim, and I'm part of the C.E. Smith Museum, and I'm a volunteer here. And basically, part of the exhibit that I helped with is the Transcontinental Railroad, and this is the very beginning. The part with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War and how it catapulted the Transcontinental Railroad. Basically, he wanted the East and the West to be connected by freight because it was a huge economic impact. And then in the very front, we have a huge photo here of a train. And this whole room is basically all the hardships, the surveys of the past archaeologists, and there's compasses here and tools that they used. They had such harsh conditions, and a little further here, there's the Big Four. The flip side is the stocks and bonds, and we have the Confederate money as well as railroad money and the money of the time period.
Hi, my name is Esther Kenner. I'm a grad student here at CSU East Bay. My exhibit for the opening of the museum is the surveyors who started the Transcontinental Railroad and the hardships that they endured going over rugged terrain, rocky mountains, snow-covered hills. This is scene represents a campsite where the surveyors might have stayed. This was made from mostly moss and a little bit of acrylic. It started with a skeleton of cardboard. It was cut out, wrapped in bubble wrap, and coated with burlap, painted. All the moss was attached with glue gun. These were formed from models. I chose this photo because it shows the work that the men did up in the trestles and the incredible feats that they went through to actually build these railroads. And this is an extension of this photo that just shows what a campsite might have looked like, and you can see that this is a huge area with the people up here representing the scale of these mountains were massive, and the effort that it took to get this railroad started and the dangers that they endured.
Partner to the places like horses to the trees. Join hand and serve in the lift.
Hi, my name is Sheena Sullivan, and I'm the exhibit coordinator for All Aboard. And I helped work on part of the local case here. We have the Hayward train station sign, the Western Pacific, and it's the original sign from the Western Pacific train station, which was torn down to make way for BART after the old rail system was dismantled. We also have a old women's silk dress from around the 1900s to show kind of what people would be wearing while they waited for the trains at the train station platforms. We also borrowed a trunk that happened to belong to Mr. Stanton and his wife, and he was part of building the Transcontinental Railroad along with James Strobridge, who was also local. And he was involved in the Golden Spike ceremony at Promontory Point.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Behar, and I've been a part of this museum class here, and I can tell you a little bit about the Chinese Corner. This case is to showcase the different labor techniques used by the Chinese Americans who built the Transcontinental Railroad. They primarily worked with the Central Pacific Railroad. The famous technique was a blasting technique. So this technique was one that the Chinese suggested to the construction supervisor when they came across these great, big, huge granite cliffs and had no way on, idea of how they would build a railroad track along the cliff. So the Chinese laborers that were hired by Charles Crocker suggested that they use a technique used by their ancestors when they built I think it's the Yangtze Gorge in China. And that method was where they would be lowered in a basket with a rope, and then they would drill a hole in the wall and fill it with black powder and light a fuse and give a signal to be hoisted up. So that method proved to be very successful and was adopted by the construction supervisor, and they went on to continue using that technique and even modified it with the use of nitroglycerin. However, there was no record kept of the number of Chinese that passed away and died during these these construction projects, but there is estimated that it was quite a few. And they, really worked hard on this railroad, so this is why we wanted to honor them here in this corner. And these are just some of the local artifacts. We wanted to emphasize the fact that the Chinese kind of had separate camps when they were out there working on the railroad, where they would ship in their own food, and it kind of had a real, mini Chinatown type of setting. And they kind of followed a lot of their own practices, including the tea drinking. So it was actually a benefit for them because they boiled the water and actually remained much more healthier than some of the other Irish crews and other white workers who were just drinking the water from the streams. So actually there was always a designated tea carrier who would suspend 2 barrels on a bamboo pole and would bring tea to the workers there. So. And that's just a little bit about the Chinese.
Hi, I'm Lee Davenport. I'm working as a student in the anthropology department here. My major is actually history, public history, but my graduate school will be history and anthropology, where I hope to end up in a museum as a curator someday. In this corner, what we have is the duality of the Native Americans' involvement in the railroads. As the railroad came through, really it split their sacred hunting grounds in half. The buffalo wouldn't cross the tracks, so it split the herds, and it also split the tribes. Their traditional pathing grounds. So many of the Native Americans were understandably upset with the coming of the Transcontinental Railroad, but some worked with the railroad. They helped build it. They worked as security. They joined the army. So this exhibit back here kind of but displays the good and the bad and the ugly, I guess. Where they destroyed tracks. Some destroyed tracks as the trains were coming through. They were looted, but also they helped build it. So it's it's just kind of showing the dual nature of people and the individuality of the coming of the railroad.
So hi, my name is Viviana Rodriguez, and I work on the Pullman Porter exhibit.
Hi, my name is Rebecca McGee, and I did the African American Pullman Porter card,
Our exhibit is about the Pullman Porters,
and it's about the African Americans' contribution to the railroad industry.
and most importantly, the contributions of the Pullman Porters and what that did for the railroad and for the popularization of the Pullman carts.
They were servers on the train, waitresses. There wasn't that many females. They were cooks and baggage handlers.
And how they built the first African American union, the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Cars, and also just is an amazing history on how it all ties into the civil rights movement.
We had a donation of the Barack Obama train. It's a collector's piece. He took the historic train ride that Lincoln took to Washington.
Hello, my name is Stephen Hershey. I worked on this case right here. It's about influence of trains in national parks. And I had a partner, her name's Ann. She helped me out with making the maps here. And so what the national parks did, they actually promoted the actual natural scenery and natural history for the United States. And so what the railroads and the trains did, and the companies, they actually promoted the national parks for actually increasing tourism to the parks, like Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Klondike Gold Rush. And so what they did is they actually made these pamphlets and posters. And so with these posters, actually had like advertisements and actually promoted the trains, and which actually brought in more tourists to the United States. Actually, before the train started with the national parks here, many American tourists went overseas in Europe and the Swiss Alps. But you actually go to the Swiss Alps here, which is like the Rocky Mountains. But I had a lot of fun with this museum class course. It was a lot of fun, and I hope to do it next year.
My man's a jolly railroad man. Folks all call him Shorty. He never works at anything else. Tomorrow he'll be 40. An engineer is what he is. For him I'll go the limit. So try and beat me if you can. His engine's never timid.
I'm Mark Kavanaugh, and I am a 6 to 7 year senior in biological anthropology here at Cal State East Bay. And for the museum class this quarter, I was given the task of coming up with a painting to use as a backdrop for all of the standard gauge trains. Originally, we were looking at the standard gauge trains, and in order to complete a loop, you need 6-foot diameter, which would not be possible in the museum. So Dr. Miller came up with the idea of having them all come outwards, as they currently are, coming towards the viewer. So I set about deciding the perspective and researching a bunch of different photos, hundreds of photos of different train stations and towns and all sorts of different things to build into the background. And so we lined up, Amanda, who isn't here, built the platform, and then we put the track on it and lined it up so it came out to the viewer. And then I pretty much drew it onto the blank canvases, and then went about from there designing a whole sort of city in the background. I did the canvases, I painted them in oil paint, I built the canvases myself, and it's taken about 6 months to do. And probably in the last month is when it really got going. Finally finished it because I was running out of time. For the platform, we textured the top with sort of a combination of paint and sand, which gave a pretty good graveled look, sort of like a rail yard. And then all the trains Dr. Miller decided on, so I didn't really have any input on that. But I was able to paint them going into the background as president, the center one. And so it does give a perspective of their coming out to the Veer.
About him in our home that night. When the wind comes down the chimney, we would shake with fright. Jesse's wife said, Jesse, it's the coin we need. He polished up his rifle, called his old trusty, and then he galloped over to his brother Frank. We've got to have some money from the Pittsfield Bank. Jesse rode in town next day at 10 o'clock. The cashier at the bank, he had an awful shock. Jesse had him covered with his 44. His pal drank from the bank $1,000 or more. Jeff was in his cabin one day all
Alright, name's Alvaro Almanza. This is my case. It's based on the Wilcox train robbery and other famous train robberies. Wilcox train robbery is one of the most famous train robberies. It involved the Wild Bunch, which was headed by Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. And in the train robbery, they accidentally used too much dynamite for the train, so they ended up blowing up the cage and the train cars and also the safe, and blew up a lot of money. Originally, it was believed that they got away with $30,000, but later they found out it was more than $60,000 that they got away with. Things that are unique about this case would probably be the hills and the actual cowboys that were handmade and hand painted and colored, because otherwise there wasn't any available for this scale.
Partner to the places like horses to the crazy. Partner to the places like horses to the crazy.